Life of David Livingston, Part 19. And Chapter 7, the beginning. We left Dr. Livingston on shipboard in the island of Mauritius, lamenting the untimely death of his longtime Makololo companion, Sekwabu. He remained here enjoying the good climate and English comfort and getting well of an enlargement of the spleen caused by some 30 different attacks of African fever for several months, and then departed for England, taking the route by the Red Sea and happily avoiding a threatened shipwreck. He reached home on 12 December, as happy and grateful a man, no doubt, as there was ever in the Three Kingdoms. I wonder what that even means, the Three Kingdoms. England, Scotland, and Wales? Quebec? One remarkable effect of Dr. Livingston's long sojourn and travels among the tribes of Africa was that, so far as his native language was concerned, it almost untongued him. He had so long almost exclusively spoken in one or another foreign language or dialect, and for nearly 5 years had only met with an Englishman now and then, and when he went abroad, the frolic of Kilimane, he found himself almost tongue-tied. I seemed to know the language perfectly, he says, but the words I wanted would not come at my call. By the time he reached England, however, this cause of embarrassment among Englishmen had greatly diminished, and he could respond to the hearty receptions with which he was everywhere greeted in good, vigorous Saxon. Soon there was no halt in his speech at all. It is probably true that no returned missionary ever met with more cordial reception by his countrymen than did Dr. Livingston. He was welcomed by all classes of people, while religious bodies, missionary societies, and select circles of learned men hastened to express their appreciation of his great labors and discoveries. Medals, fellowships, and memberships of various associations for the cultivation and spread of knowledge and science were conferred upon him, nor were the they were conferred on him, nor were these recognitions confined to associations in his own country, but came also from France, United States, and other lands. During the period of his absence, the public press of his native land and the United States had been so wonderfully enlarged in scope by the magnetic telegraph, and its influence had been so greatly increased in consequence thereof, and of the enterprising spirit of certain journalists whose names have been seen become celebrated throughout the world, that it might well be said that a new power had grown up in the state and society. Reports of meetings in honor of Dr. Livingston were carried by 10,000 of the swiftest wings all over the kingdom, and very soon afterwards all over the United States. Thus, in all that the vast portion of the world where the English is the language of the people, more was known in a few days of his explorations in Africa than would have been known to the learned few in many weeks or months had those explorations ended about the time at which they had commenced. It was impossible that the world should be satisfied with the mere outlines of a career which had been so adventurous and so useful, and that of this great explorer in Africa. The more the press published in regard to it, the more the public perceived that a full account could not but contain a vast quantity of interesting and valuable reading matter. Accordingly, Dr. Livingston was induced to prepare that volume, Missionary Travels and Researches in South Africa, upon which his literary fame with the world at large thus far rests, and which unfold to the reading public a series of strange pictures upon which the public has ever since looked with deep and growing interest. The preparation of this volume, which it is believed may with justice be pronounced a work which the world will not willingly let die, was perhaps the most difficult of all Dr. Livingston's great undertakings. The preparation of this narrative, he says in his preface, has taken much longer time than, from my experience in authorship, I had anticipated. And he goes on to say that those who have never carried a book through the press can form no idea of the amount of toil it involves. The process has increased my respect for authors and authoresses a thousandfold. The work was really commenced upon the invitation of Sir Roderick Murchison, president of the Royal Geographical Society, which had given Dr. Livingston a special meeting of welcome upon his return from Africa. The design came near being frustrated, however, by the explorer's inability to provide for his Mokololo escort and his companions, whom he had left at Tete, Sene, and Quilime. This difficulty was overcome, however, by His Majesty Don Pedro V of Portugal, who sent out orders for the support of these men until Dr. Livingston should return. Thus, freed from care on this account, he proceeded with his work of authorship and gave to it, as must be evident to everyone who has carefully examined it, the greatest study and pains. As a work of literary art, it is surely one of the most complete successes among books of the kind which have ever been published. Perhaps it may truthfully be called among the books of its general kind the greatest success. The work was completed and went into press in the year 1857, and at once met with the most generous reception by the reading public and the favorable judgment of critics. It was speedily republished in the United States, where very large editions were rapidly sold. No inexperienced author of a work of a serious nature ever found his way more rapidly to the general reading public than Dr. Livingston. His book was a faithful I keep drawing these words I've never even seen before. Daguerreotype of his labors in Africa, and these, as we have already seen, were of a threefold nature, such namely, as to be of special interest and value to all Christian denominations, interested in the work of missionaries, to all men devoted to the acquisition and spread of scientific knowledge, and also to that large, influential, and practical class of men who conduct the trade and commerce of the world. For all these, he was inspired by his remarkable genius to construct a work which was at once instructive, interesting, and valuable. And hence, the fact that his work was favorably received throughout Christendom was but natural, and one of the logical results of the liberal spirit with which he did everything that he was called upon to do. And here perhaps it might be well enough to close the account of the literary labors and results connected with Dr. Livingston's first sojourn in Africa. It may be well to remark, however, that even before the appearance of his great work, several attempts were made in England to impose upon the public as his spurious narratives of his travels. The journals of London, however, were quick to expose them, and the booksellers utterly refused to have anything to do with them. Greatly to the credit and honor of the trade, some 2 years after his work was published, a volume appeared in America, the title page of which was almost identical to that which the original work, and upon which copyright was published as secured according to the law. It is simply the work of Livingston, greatly and most injuriously abridged, with an addendum giving an outline of a few discoveries in Africa familiar to every schoolboy. So far as it goes, it is Livingston, word for word, but very many pages to which he evidently gave the greatest study and in which he took the greatest pride are entirely omitted. Thus, for example, the whole of his interesting account of the discovery of Lake Dailolo as the watershed of central South Africa, with that singular river sending part of its waters to the Atlantic and the other part to the Indian Ocean, is expunged. Other equally interesting portions of the work are wanting, and this book is duly entered according to the Act of Congress. It is like authorizing someone to take out a copyright on the play of Hamlet, whose authorship in the business had consisted in removing Hamlet altogether from the drama. Such murder of genius in accordance with the forms of law is hardly less than atrocious. Perhaps that wretched travesty of Mr. Dickens' most brilliant and powerful novel, which travesty goes by the name of Newman Noggs, and is often represented on an American stage, is copyrighted. These things being so, do we have any copyrights which white men or any other men are bound to respect? And here the great explorer might have rested upon his laurels. None of his contemporaries had done more, all things considered, for religion, science, and mankind. Had ambition only guided him, he would have been content, but genius and duty impelled him to again forsake those English comforts, which are in fact perhaps the most comfortable in the world, and proceed for the second time to that continent about which he had himself thrown a peculiar charm and interest, which, it would appear, can only increase with time, and as modern enterprise and civilization extend their triumphs and their beneficent influences over the land, on so large part of which he was long and solitary and intrepid explorer. He was the long, solitary, and intrepid explorer.